Mara found the wolf at the edge of the Ashwood, in the hour between midnight and the first gray pull of dawn, when the forest held its breath, and the only sound was the wet crunch of frost beneath her boots. She had come for nightshade root. She found something else. He was enormous, silver-white, the color of snow that has been untouched for days, lying on his side in the bracken, with an iron bolt buried in his left shoulder. Not a hunter's mistake. The bolt was too precise, too deliberate, placed by someone who knew exactly where to put it, and was interrupted before they could finish the job. She should have left. She knew the law. Wolves in wolf form belonged to the pack, to the alpha, to the old rules that ran deeper than village custom. They did not belong to healers' daughters who had no wolf of their own, and no business kneeling in the mud at this hour. She knelt anyway. Her hands found the bolt before she had finished deciding anything. That was the truth of her. She did not decide to help broken things. Her hands simply moved, and the rest of her followed. The wolf's eye opened, amber, lit from within, watching her without panic or aggression. Just watching. Every animal she had ever touched in pain had tried to end her. This one held still. It let her work. Her hands shook. She did not let them shake wide enough to matter. She pulled the bolt clean in one motion, pressed her bundled headscarf against the wound before the bleeding could think about what it wanted to do, and held firm. The wolf exhaled, a long, slow release, like something that had been held too tight for too long was finally allowed to loosen. Getting him home was not elegant. 300 pounds of wolf, and she was not a large woman. She was, however, a woman who had inherited her mother's debts, her mother's cottage, and her mother's absolute refusal to be stopped by inconvenience. There was a rope. There was a cellar door she would need to rehang. There were 2 aprons she would never recover. There was language she had learned from her father and had used sparingly until that night. She got him in. She packed the wound with fever root and pressed herb, wrapped what she could, and sat back on her heels in the cellar dark and looked at him breathing. Outside, the forest was quiet. She went upstairs and ground more compress by lamplight, and did not think about the soldiers who had come through the village 2 days ago, asking about a missing king. The fever arrived on the second day, the way fevers do, uninvited, arrogant, settling in like it owned the place. Mara worked through the night, cold water and fever root, and the kind of focus that leaves no room for anything else, which was the only kind of focus she trusted. The wolf drifted in and out of something that looked like sleep, but wasn't quite. Once, in the deepest, darkest part of the night, he made a sound. One small sound, low and helpless, and she put her hand flat against his ribs without thinking. "Not yet," she said, quietly, without ceremony. He didn't. The fever broke just before dawn, sudden and total, like a tide going out all at once. She sat on the cellar stairs with her back against the stone wall, and her eyes closed and her hands, finally, still in her lap. She was so tired. She was not afraid. She stayed. No. Because he could not talk, she talked. She talked about the properties of yarrow, which she had been collecting longer than she could remember. She talked about the price of salt in the market, which was criminal, and getting worse. She talked about the gap in the eastern wall of her cottage that she had been meaning to patch since last winter, and had not gotten around to. She talked, and he listened, or rested with his eyes open in a way that felt like listening, and the cellar felt less like a hiding place and more like a room. She did not talk about the soldiers. She did not talk about the fact that their banner had carried the king's crest, the silver wolf over a mountain, black on gold, or that one of them had knocked on her door, and she had answered it with flour on her hands, and innocence on her face, and nothing unusual anywhere that anyone could see. Because the cellar door was hidden under the rug by the kitchen table, and she had moved the rug before she answered. She did not think about why she had moved the rug. She thought about yarrow. Mess. On the 3rd night, she woke to find the cellar changed. Not a wolf. Almost not a wolf. The shape of him was shifting, caught somewhere between forms, and she had enough time to see the breadth of a man's shoulders, the strong line of a jaw, the amber eyes, unchanged, always unchanged, before he pulled the shift back with a visible effort that cost him. She could see what it cost. She sat on the stairs and did not look directly at him, the way you do not look directly at something that is in the middle of becoming itself. "Take your time," she said. She went upstairs and heated the broth she had made that afternoon. She brought it down and set it at the bottom of the stairs, and went back up and sat in her kitchen and listened to the silence below until it changed into a different kind of silence, the quieter kind, the kind after something difficult is finished. She did not ask what he was. She already knew. Dawn came gray and ordinary. The cellar was empty. The straw pallet had been smoothed flat, which a wolf cannot do. The bowl had been rinsed and placed upside down to dry, which a wolf cannot do. And on the table where she kept her mortar and pestle, sitting in the exact center, was a single coin. Heavy, embossed, the kind of coin that comes from one treasury in one kingdom. She picked it up, turned it over once, turned it over again. Then she put it in her apron pocket and went out to tend her garden, and did not think about it. She thought about it the entire time. They came the next morning while she was grinding chamomile. 6 soldiers in formation, one banner she recognized from 2 days before, and behind them, on a black horse, without armor, wearing the kind of simple dark clothes that only look simple until you notice the quality of the cloth, a man. He was tall. His left shoulder sat wrong, the way a shoulder sits when a wound is recently mended by someone who knew what they were doing. His hair was dark, pushed back without care. His jaw was the jaw she had seen for one unguarded moment in the cellar dark. His eyes were amber. She kept grinding. He said something to the soldiers with one word, and they stopped where they were, at the garden gate, and did not come further. He walked alone down the narrow stone path between her lavender beds, and he stood in her garden, where no king had ever stood, where no one particularly important had ever stood. Actually, it was just her garden, and he looked at her the way the wolf had looked at her, without evasion, without apology. She set down her mortar. He said he was sorry to come without warning. His voice was low, unhurried, the voice of a man who did not need volume to be heard. He said he owed her a debt he was not certain he could repay in any conventional sense. He said, and here he paused, just once, just briefly, that he had heard a great many things about her in the past day, from the people of her village, while he was trying to decide whether to come at all. She waited. He said he wanted her to come with him, not as a guest, not as a healer in his household, though she was welcome to keep her remedies and her opinions about medicinal stores, which he understood were considerable. He wanted her as his Luna, his equal, his match, the word the old traditions used, the word that could not be taken back once it was spoken. He said it plainly. No performance, no flourish. 4 sentences and then silence. He waited. She reached into her apron pocket and took out the coin. She placed it on the garden wall between them, flat in the morning light, and said nothing. She had thought about what she wanted to say for exactly as long as she had been not thinking about this coin, which was since yesterday morning, which was a long time, and when it came to it, the coin said it better than she could. She knew what he was. She had known from the second night, perhaps earlier. She had not used it. She had not sent for the soldiers when they came to her door. She had not thought about what the knowledge was worth. She needed him to understand that first, before anything else. He looked at the coin on the wall for a long moment. Then he looked at her. He said, and she would remember this sentence the way you remember the very few sentences in a life that rearranged something, that he had not left it as payment. He had left it so she would know that he came back remembering, not what she could have taken, what she didn't. The lavender moved in the morning wind. A bird somewhere in the oak tree above the eastern wall made its ordinary business of the day. She picked up the coin. She put it back in her apron pocket. She told him that she had opinions about medicinal stores that were, in fact, considerable, and that if she was going to be responsible in any capacity for the health of a household as large as a king's, she was going to need a proper drying room with southern exposure, not a dark shelf somewhere, and that this was not a negotiable point. He did not smile. He was not a man whose version of a smile lived on his mouth. It lived around the eyes, in the way the corners shifted, almost nothing, barely visible. It was there now. He said the drying room could be arranged. She said she would pack her things. She did not pack everything. The mortar and pestle she left on the garden wall, in the patch of morning sun. She had others. She had her mother's, which was smaller and better, and which fit in the cedar box alongside the press cloths and the folded instructions she had written to herself over years of practice. She packed the cedar box. She packed the remedies in their labeled jars, wrapped in old linen. She packed 3 changes of clothes, her winter boots, the book of plant properties she had been adding to since she was 12, and the coin. The coin she packed last. She stood in the empty kitchen for a moment and looked around at the low beams and the cold hearth and the rug over the cellar door that she had never moved back to its proper place. She left the cellar door open. She would say, if anyone asked, that she had simply forgotten to close it. She had not forgotten. There are some doors that it seems wrong to close, the ones that were opened in the dark and held something living through the cold, the ones that you crouched beside at 3 in the morning with your hands pressed flat against something enormous and breathing, and said, quietly, to no one in particular, and to someone in particular, not yet. Those doors, she felt, deserved to stay open, as a kind of acknowledgement, as a small and private thing that no one needed to know about except her, and possibly the wolf who was not a wolf, and was now waiting by the gate on a black horse, not impatiently, simply waiting the way he had waited in the cellar when she told him to take his time. She picked up her bag. She went out. The village was just beginning its morning. Smoke from the baker's chimney, the sound of the smith's hammer starting up, 2 children racing down the lane who stopped and stared at the soldiers by her gate with the open-mouthed delight of children confronted with anything unusual. She did not look at the soldiers. She walked down the garden path between the lavender, her boots quiet on the stone, her bag on her shoulder. He was watching her. She did not change her pace for it. When she reached the gate, he moved to take her bag, a single clean motion, and she let him. Not because she needed the help, but because it was the gesture of someone who had decided to be the kind of man who carried things, and you did not refuse people their first small attempts at being different than they were. The soldiers fell into formation. He settled the bag across his horse, and then, without ceremony, offered her his hand, his right hand, the good shoulder, to help her mount. His hand was warm. She had known it would be. She had felt it, that third night, in the changed cellar, in the single unguarded moment before the shift reversed, the warmth of a man's shoulder, solid and real, and her 2 hands pressed against it without flinching. She took his hand. She mounted. They rode out of the village on the road that leads north, toward the mountain and the kingdom she had never seen, and she sat straight on the borrowed horse and watched the road ahead and felt the coin in her pocket, warm from her body, and did not look back at the open cellar door. She did not need to look back. She already knew what it looked like. A door left open. A small, deliberate thing. A choice made in the dark that turned out, in the ordinary morning light, to have been the right one.